Welcome CSE 121. This is object-oriented programming in Python, and the purpose of doing this is really to prepare us for working with Java in programming 2. We're not going to do a whole lot of object-oriented programming with Python, but we're just going to give you a little introduction of how it works because you're going to hear the term a lot, and we're not going to be able to do a whole lot of fun things with it, although turtles that we've done in the past actually use object-oriented programming, so you've done that in the past. But this is really just to explain the structure and some of the terminology. So I have a sheet here. Instead of a PowerPoint, I have a sheet. There's some links on here. If these links don't work for whatever reason in the PDF, the bottom ones weren't working, I also copied them into coursework where you could get to them. And I have some definitions here why create classes. Classes are a major part of object-oriented programming, where you kind of group together objects that are kind of resemble real-world type objects, and they're going to have their own attributes and their own behaviors, which are methods, which are really functions inside of a class is what a method is. And it says, what is a class? And it's really a blueprint for a new object. Again, that'll kind of mimic real-world objects. And in this case, we're going to do things like employees and cars and stuff like that. And we're going to instantiate objects from the class and create instances, and we've already done that with turtles, and we're going to do one with employees. So if you want to read through this more, you can, but it'll probably be easier once we start doing that. So I'm going to go in and create a new repel, and we could do this right in Repel-It, and we're going to use Python. So I'm going to hit new repel, and you could just use Python. This doesn't have to be turtle or tkinter or anything like that. We'll just do the new version of Python. And here it is, and I'll move this over a little bit so I can kind of see things a little bit better. And I'm not doing anything with any files right now, so I'll close that just so we have more room to kind of type here and we can see our lines a little bit better, because it's going to be more about the code, less about the output. There won't be any interesting turtles moving around a page or input forms or anything like that. It'll just be some basic console output. So what we're going to do is create a class of employee. So it's going to be an object that'll mimic real-world type of object that obviously would have different instances. You won't just have one employee, it's going to be about multiple employees, but we're going to create a class called employee that has its own attributes and can even have its own behaviors or methods. So we're just going to say class employee, and when we create a class, we usually use a capital letter like that, and we're going to use a colon. You don't need parentheses here to do that, and everything will be indented inside here. And when we do this, what we're going to do is create an init method. And you don't have to do this, but this is usually the process that is done to create instances. So you're going to create an init method, and it's just a function, and it's going to be def, and it uses 2 underscores, and then it uses init, be careful typing that, and then 2 underscores, and then in parentheses, you can see it's saying some things here, self, args, quargs. We're going to put self in here. It's always going to need self in here. It doesn't have to use the word self, but that's convention of what they'll use. Sometimes you'll see the term this or something like that with JavaScript, but we're going to use self, and that'll always be the first argument. And for employee, we might put in arguments like first, last, department, and actually I think from this one I'll take out email to start, because we're actually going to create email from first and last. We'll do a little function that does that. So this is our function in here. This is actually a method, and this is called a constructor, because this will basically, this function, this init method, is basically the constructor method that's going to be able to create our instances. That happens kind of in the background when we work with turtles, but here we're going to create it. And what we're going to do now is just kind of create some attributes. So we have our arguments here that will be sent when we create instances, but we want to basically identify them, and we're going to identify them by using self and then some kind of variable name that's going to represent the argument. So we could use the same names. Self equals first. We're going to do things like this, and just keep in mind that the first that's here represents the argument, so these have to be the same. So the ones on the right side have to be the same as the arguments that you're supplying, because you're basically saying this is kind of like a variable that represents the argument that's applied. So this is the official name, and this is kind of representing what it's going to get. So you know, you could call this f. You could really do this. You could have self f equals first, but these have to match up. But we're just going to keep them the same. And we're going to do one for last and department. We're going to do another one that says self.email. Now this isn't an argument that we're going to send, but we can still create it here because we could still use it. So I'm going to put self.email equals, and instead of representing an argument, because we don't have an argument for email, what we're going to put in here is we're just going to use first, and what I'm going to do is use first and then use the first initial, so I could put a 0 in here, basically the first string letter out of the first name that's in there. So kind of, if it's Steve Smith, it'll be S. Smith will be part of the email, and we can concatenate this, and we're just going to put it together right now with last, and then we'll add on a little string at the end, and we'll just put warren.edu. We'll use it like they're employees here at the college. So we'll create that. So that's basically our constructor method that we're doing right here. And then while we're doing this, we'll also create a behavior or a method. These are the attributes, they're instance variables. Now we'll create a function inside here, which is called a method. So I'll use def, and I'll just call it full name. And I'm going to have to put self in here. And what we're going to do with this method is we're just going to return a value, and I'm going to return, I'll use an f string in here. So I'll use f and then a string, and we're just going to put self.first, and then we'll put a space, and we'll do self.last. So that'll just return the name, and unless we want to do a comma in here or anything like that and put the last name first, but we'll just put the name right here, and we'll finish that off with quotes. So all that's going to do is just put a name. It's going to print out a full name from this information that we're putting in here. So we'll just see how that works first. We have to create these, and then we'll kind of print them out a little bit. So what we can do next is we can create instances of these. So what I'll do is I'll go outside of this class kind of constructor that we have set up here, this class definition, and then I'm going to create some instances just like we did with turtles. And I'll just call it E1. I'll keep it as short as possible. I'll call it E1 for employee 1. And this is going to, just like we did with turtle, it's going to be employee. And instead of just doing this, what we're going to have to put in here is we're going to have to put our arguments in here. Steve as the first name argument, Smith as the last name argument, and then department, I'm just going to put faculty. We'll just kind of mirror the college kind of thing. And you might say, well, there's 4 arguments up here and there's only 3 down here. The self argument is implied, and it's even going to count self in here when you do it. Because if you don't put enough, it'll say expecting, let's say you only put 2 in here, it'll say expecting 4. You might think, well, why is it expecting 4? I only need 3. Self will be implied, so it's always going to imply the self, but you don't have to type it in there. So this would create an employee. So if we just ran this, it would be created. You wouldn't see anything. And if you'd want to print out, I'll put my prints down here. And then what I'll do is I'll just print out, I'll just show you a couple things. If you just printed out E1, first of all, you're going to get just like an object with a memory location. So if I print this out, you're going to get something like that. It's just saying there's the object and it's at that memory location. That's not that helpful. We'll fix that a little bit later. But what we could do is if we print out E1 dot first, that'll print out the first name. And if I print it out last, it'll print out the last name, or if I printed out multiple things, it'll do that. And even if I print it out, I'll copy this here and print out the email. What it should do is use the first and last name. It should combine that all together and print out an email. And if you wanted it lowercase, because I don't like it with uppercase like that, you could put it in here. You'd have to do it here each time, so I'll just put a dot lower here right after that, and I'll put a dot lower here just as well, because otherwise it'll take the way you entered the first name and the last name. So I'll put lower here and make sure you put the parentheses, because when you get an error, one thing you'll find is you forgot one of the parentheses or something like that. So that way if I run it, then it'll be a lowercase email and it'll still say their last name. And then even if I wanted to print out their full name, I could say e.1.fullname, because that's the method that we're using. So you will need the parentheses in there. You don't have to put self in there because you already have it here. You already have it in front of it. And there it is, Steve Smith. Now, if you did put full name, if you printed full name, you can see what I'm saying. This isn't that exciting, but that's kind of the way it works. And you could certainly create as many as you want here. I'll just create a second one just so I have another. And here's another one, Ralph Rumson, academics. So if I wanted to print out Ralph Rumson, he would be E2. And I could print out his full name, and then I could also print out, if I wanted to just print out an attribute, I could put his department here, and you can see what I'm getting here. There's Steve Smith, there's Ralph Rumson, he's academics. I don't have his email, but if I wanted his email, I could put it in here as well. And now I'm kind of getting his attributes from the class. This isn't a lot of fun, but you're learning how to pull this information from the class. And also the idea with this class is we're also going to do something called inheritance, where we can make subclasses of this class. This class would be the parent class or the superclass, and then we could create subclasses. So I'll do that quick. We're going to make a subclass. So I'm going to keep these calls, these instance creation things away from here. So I'm even just going to put instances or instantiation, whatever it would be, and then I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to copy this, and this new class is going to be called Adjunct. We'll kind of make it Adjunct faculty, like kind of different than a regular employee, that it's a part-time employee. By putting employee in parentheses, this makes Adjunct kind of a subclass of employee. It's going to share a lot of the same properties that we have here, even though we could change these, but it's really going to inherit anything that we don't change. So that's kind of the way the parent-child operation works. And we're also going to do something called a super init too. And what we would do here is we'd keep the original ones that we want, like we'd have first, last name, but anything different here, I'm going to put rank because adjunct faculty actually has a rank of adjunct and senior adjunct. So I'm going to put something here called rank, and I'll put that in there. And then I'm also going to, well, I'll leave that in there because we're going to use that. But we might also do something in here. We'll kind of make a new one, but I'm going to call this super, because this is going to get information. We're going to make something called a super init. And you've got to make sure that you put the super, the parentheses, the dot, and then the init. And then in here, you actually do not put self, even though it's telling us to do it. You don't put self in here when you're making the super, but I'm going to do the first. I'm going to use the ones that I'm going to inherit from here. So I'm going to inherit the first, last, and that's it. That's all I'm going to inherit for here, because I'm going to make a new department one. So this will be a new one. We don't need self.first. We only need something new, but we do need self. I'll put a rank here. And actually, let me get rid of this, because we'll create a variable that will actually get posted in there. So I'll just leave that alone for now. So it's going to take first and last, and the only new one that's in here right now is going to be rank. That's why. Now these are the arguments that are going to be set when we create the adjunct. So we have a new one called rank. So instead of 4 arguments, we're going to have 5 arguments, even though self will be implied. And we'll basically inherit these attributes from this class, so we don't have to recreate them. But we did create a rank class because we didn't have one over here in the employee class. But now we're putting a rank in here. So we're going to create basically adjunct employees when we do this. And I'm actually going to make a new email one by copying this one, because I'll make it a little bit different. So for them, instead of using the first initial, we're basically going to use the first name, and then we're going to put a dot in there. So I'm going to put a string of a dot and put it together like that, because since there's so many adjuncts, we can't just use the first initial. There's too many that are going to be duplicated. So we'll just put a dot in there. So it'll combine their first name, dot, last name, and that'll kind of indicate whenever you see that those are adjunct employees, because the regular employees will just have first initial and their last name. So that's the way that's set up. So this is basically a child class or a subclass of the parent class, which is the super. So this super init here, this method, basically means it indicates that you're going to be taking from the super class. You're going to be taking these attributes from the super class. So we have some new ones down here, and I don't have to even make a new full name here. We could use the same one because that'll inherit. So let's just see how this works. Let's just make a new one down here. So I'm going to make it employee E3, and instead of E3, maybe I'll call it A1, so that they're separate, and it's not going to be employee, it's going to be adjunct. And then I'll put in their names, and I'll put Fred Firth, and then I'm going to put in academics. And I was mentioning something, we could put in something that's always the same, since it's always going to be academics. And then I could put in also another variable. I'll say SA for senior adjunct. So I'll need to put these up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say A equals academics. And that's just so I don't have to type it. It's just a little help here. And then for this one, I'll make SA senior adjunct. And I should also make one. I'll do AC for academics for that department, and then A for adjunct, SA. So that makes more sense when I put that in there. So academic, senior, adjunct. Now these I have to make strings for the names. These I do not, because they're variables. I have rank, I have department, I have all the arguments that I need. So now if I print out, if I want to print out A1, and I'll do full name to see his whole full name. I'll do that, and then I'll do his email without the parentheses. And this will show that it'll use the new email creation that's down here, but it'll still use the full name method that's from the employee class, that's from the parent class. So let's see how that works. This is going to be really exciting to see this happen. And we have an error. And let's read the error. Missing one required positional argument, department. So what did I do here for department? I don't know if it's that, because I didn't put AC. Oh, I see what I did. Because I was going to put a new department thing in there, I took this out, but I should now, that way I don't have a department place in here. So I need to I need to put that back in here. So let me inherit that here, because I still need to inherit that argument. So that I forgot, because I was going to create a new one that basically got added to it, but since I'm not really creating a new one in here, it still needs to inherit that place. So I need to do that. So if I run this, that should work. And there it is, Fred Firth, and there's my fred.firth@warren.edu. So just remember, I still needed to inherit department. I messed that up, but that's good, because it's good to see mess ups and see where problems are occurring, and it helps you learn a little bit about it. And again, I just use variables here, just regular global variables, just to put in here, just to make typing a little bit easier when I create these. So, but we'll cover a couple more concepts with object-oriented programming. So again, not real exciting, but it's just learning the concept and the terminology here. So I'll stop here, and then we'll do a different setup with cars or